Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Hesse Bros Pod. Brent Hesse and Luke Hesse fired up for the final week of the regular season, wishing you a happy new year. And some things, when they change, they stay the same for the Chiefs. Back to the one seed. That was already locked up at the last pod, but in case you've forgotten, it's been a while since the Chiefs have played, and it's going to be a while since we see Patrick Mahomes. But meanwhile, for the Lions, a big game ahead this week. The marquee game of the final week of the regular season. Luke, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm starting to get a little bit of butterflies, but you already know Detroit. We're bringing the grit this week. This is the biggest regular season game in the history of the Detroit Lions franchise. The chance for the first time for them ever to get the one seed and lock up the division for 2 years in a row. What a time to be a Lions fan. And we're going to get into that matchup, but first, I say we talked about it last week. We had an absolute classic game on Saturday night. Broncos versus Bengals. We knew it'd be a good one, Brent, and it absolutely delivered. Overtime finish. What are your thoughts on that game? And are you scared of the Bengals getting in? You think they could make some noise if they end up making it in?
Like, I think this is the most over talked about, overhyped thing of the entire. I mean, the media is off the rocker in so many different ways recently. This is one of them. Yes, congratulations to the Bengals. They snuck by Denver. It's a good win, no doubt about it. Their best win of the season by far. Bengals, that's their only win against the team with the winning record all year, and they needed overtime to do it. Their defense still looks atrocious. Their two best wins of the season in overtime against Denver. Their second best win of the year is against the Cowboys, and they needed the Cowboys to block a punt and then not know what to do with the block punt in order to win the game. So, no, I'm not worried about the Bengals because they have a good quarterback and two good wide receivers. That doesn't make an NFL football team, and that's clear by the record. That's clear by the fact that they lose to every good team they play. So sure, I would love for the Bengals to get in. Joe Burrow versus Josh Allen in the first round. Sign me up. Do I think the Bengals win that game? No. Do I would I want them to win? Absolutely. Then they knock out the Buffalo Bills. Sure. I'm not worried about the Bengals. Now, obviously, if you're asking, are they more dangerous than the other teams that could get that spot? Denver, obviously, yes, they just beat them on the road. And Miami, yes, I agree with that. But no, they wouldn't be one of the five teams most likely to make the Super Bowl in the AFC out of the seven if they were to make the playoffs. So congrats to the Bengals. It's cool they're still alive. But no, threat level very low for Cincinnati.
That was an interesting game though on Saturday. I'm kind of on the same boat as you here, Brent. I think they could sneak in, but going to Buffalo and getting a win there, I just don't really see that happening because they're going to have Nick this week and he's just going to be absolutely ready to go. And there's no way that they're going to lose to the Bengals in that first round of the playoffs. But that was still a good game for them. And let's see, last week
Well, the
there
other
really
big
wasn't a
game,
whole lot of other games. The
the other big
Vikings
game was
Packers
the
game.
well, the Packers game, yes, Sunday afternoon and then Sunday night. Those were the other two really big games of the weekend that we didn't already talk about. We talked about the Christmas Day games prior to on the last week's episode. You can go back and watch that if you didn't catch it. But yeah, those last two games. Yeah, we'll start with the NFC North showdown. I think we were both leaning Packers, kind of thinking that maybe they were going to be the bigger threats, but no. Darnold is here. I was right all along that Jordan Love is actually the fraudulent quarterback of the two. I got to give a lot of credit to Minnesota. They are a dope team. That defense is phenomenal. Just they fly around, they cause havoc in the backfield. Flores just comes up with crazy stuff every week. Jordan Love, he looked out of sync, could not figure out what to do the whole first half of the game. And Minnesota, they were up by so much that even though they took their foot off the gas late, never really looked like Green Bay was going to be able to come back and win that one.
And I think the problem there was you saw that the passing attack for the Vikings was going ballistic, and then you look at the other side of the field with the Packers, and it looks like they don't even have a real number one receiver for Jordan Love to go to. Jaden Reed was quiet all day in such a huge matchup. Romeo Dobbs didn't do much either, and you need one of those players to step up and get open for Love if you're going to win a game like that. So it looks like the Packers are probably 1 year away at least from making a run to the Super Bowl, considering they've already lost to the Vikings twice, Lions twice, and Eagles. It's going to be tough for them to make it all the way whenever they're going to have to play at least two of those teams.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're like one of those teams that they're going to beat the bad teams, but they can't play against the elite level teams. And you're right about the wide receivers. Christian Watson was out for Green Bay. I don't even know if he's their best wide receiver. I think it's Jaden Reed still, like you say. Some weeks it's Romeo Dobbs. Missing Watson, definitely another piece of that. But clearly, the two best wide receivers on the field were both in purple, Jordan Addison and, of course, Justin Jefferson. Those two were balling out. Aaron Jones was running hard against his former team. He got dinged up, didn't really play much in the second half. That's kind of how Green Bay was able to got close to getting back into it. But yeah, Minnesota, a legitimate threat. You know, Darnold, I still have questions, but he's playing well. He's doing what he needs to do. It's kind of like the Purdy situation from last year, where I didn't think Purdy was one of the five best quarterbacks in the league last year, but he played like one. His stats backed it up, his wins backed it up. And that's kind of how Darnold's doing this year. I don't think he's a top five quarterback, not a top 10 quarterback, but the situation that he's got, O'Connell, the weapons, the confidence that he's got with the defense playing well on the other side, he looks like a top 5 or 10 quarterback according to stats. So, yeah, congrats to the Vikings. I mean, now the Lions, they've got 14 wins and still have to play for the division in the final week of the season. That's got to be frustrating. But Minnesota, they are a good team.
It definitely is frustrating, but I think one of the funny things is after the game, they're over here carrying Darnold around like he's the king of the North when they still haven't beat the Lions yet. Like, you haven't won the division. Why are you celebrating like that with the QB on your shoulders in the locker room whenever you're about to go into the biggest matchup, of your season to try and get that one seed? It seems like they feel like they already won the Super Bowl based on that celebration. I don't really know what they were doing there. And I think that's just another reason why they feel like they've already done it and they haven't done it yet. The Lions have already beat the Vikings the past four times, and we'll get into why I don't think that they're going to be able to do it again. But one more matchup from last week, Commanders versus Falcons. Sadly, it looks like the Falcons season is dwindling here after that overtime loss to Jaden Daniels. What an absolute beast. Jaden is playing out of his mind right now. What were your thoughts on that one?
Well, I was rooting for Atlanta because I have that Lions, Chiefs, Falcons all to win the division parlay. Looks like I'm gonna miss out on a couple hundo because of the Falcons. They were right there, had it for the taking, but the second half was just a nightmare for Atlanta. At least the whole third quarter and half the fourth, where they didn't touch the football. Washington just went on long, sustained drives. Jaden Daniels was using his legs so well. I mean, he looks like an experienced veteran and his first year quarterback. Just the difference in him and Penix. Penix didn't play poorly by any means, made some big throws when they needed them late, especially on some fourth downs to get that game tied and sent to overtime. But it was just every play for Daniels, just consistently just making the right play. And maybe that's the experience of him playing for the first 13, 14 weeks of the season, 14 more games than Penix has played. But it clearly showed in that second half when Jaden Daniels needed it. He made the right plays. I think this Washington team, I'm impressed by them. I think that they have a chance to win a playoff game, no doubt about it. For Atlanta, definitely heartbreaking. They had opportunities all throughout the season. You know, you look back on some of the games they lost this year, they really had no business losing. I mean, the Saints game comes to mind for sure. Then you had the one where Kirk throws like 3 interceptions against the Chargers. They still almost win that game. And then, of course, against Washington, it was right there as well. Some questionable timeout usage by Raheem Morris on that final drive. Maybe could have gotten him closer on the field goal that ended up coming up short. So yeah, Falcons fans, it's just another one in the list of the last few years. You know, I have a friend that's a Falcons fan. I don't even think he remembers the last time they were in the playoffs. It was that long ago. I was trying to talk to him about it on Christmas, I think, and he just couldn't remember when it was. It was so long ago. And it looks like it's unfortunately going to be one more year.
At least one more year. I think Penix is a good quarterback, though. He had that one big mistake early in the game, but he brought his team back and he made plays toward the end of the game to get him to overtime, but it just wasn't enough whenever you lose the coin toss like that. And also, the Falcons, they were close on some games, but then they also stole one from the Eagles when Saquon dropped a wide open pass for that first down, and against the Buccaneers earlier in that huge shootout game. That one looked like it should have been Bucks the whole way. and they send it to overtime and
Yeah,
win.
well, exactly. After you win those two early in the season, you have to be able to close it out. And the fact that they weren't, pretty sad for their part. I mean, they went through a whole quarterback change and everything and still had a chance. You know, the Buccaneers left the door open when they lost to the Cowboys a couple of weeks back. And now it looks like the Bucs will have a huge opportunity to slam that door shut in week 18. And we'll talk about some of those matchups as we go on. But yeah, that's going to be the story of it for the Falcons. Now, last game of week 17 was the Lions, and Dan Campbell said, "We're still going to run out everybody, just how we knew he would. It's the Dan Campbell way. That guy never backs down from anything. Doesn't matter if it's a meaningless game." He went out there fired up. And what were your reactions to the Detroit Lions winning a game that doesn't have any implications on seeding?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did make a good point that he kind of had to start his regular players because we're preparing all week long for this game, giving all the reps to the starting players. So it's kind of unfair to the players that are the backups. They're like, all right, you didn't have any preparation during practice, but let's just throw you straight in the game
Right.
and get all the starting reps. And then also to the other players that don't have the same players out there that they were expecting for the game. It just wouldn't have made sense to bench everybody like that. You know, maybe later in the game, if we had a bigger lead, we could have done that. But we just decided to play the game and we get a big dub. I mean, the defense is not looking too good. I'll be honest. He needs to get those interceptions. I think just speaks volumes to the way that we can win games because the Lions, these last 3 weeks, I mean, we've been putting up so many points, scoring at will. And so I feel like as long as our offense keeps humming like it is, and we have been playing like the best offense in the league for quite some time now. As long as we keep that humming, it's going to be tough to beat the Lions, especially if we just convert on fourth downs. That's all it's going to come down to.
Yeah, but they're scoring like that because they have to score like that. They're giving up 30 points a game, so they have to get to 40. It's not that they have the choice. You know, there's some other teams in the league that have gaudy records that never even gotten to 31 this season. But you know why? It's because they don't have to get to 31. They just get what they need to do and then they wrap up shop. But for the Lions, they feel like they have to score every time they touch the ball. And that pressure I feel like could mount as the season goes along in the postseason. So yeah, congrats to the Lions, a win, but another win where it's like, you know, there's a lot of red flags going around, and right now it's okay, but when it gets to the postseason, it's one and done, and you turn the ball over, and now you're behind a possession. You have to play catch up the whole game, and you're relying on your defense to get stops, and then you're pressing because you know you don't have any margin for error. Could be trouble for Detroit. Hopefully they can get healthy. Like I said, I want Detroit to do well. I just have to call it how I see it. And right now it's that they're walking a very thin line. They only have that one little avenue ways to win, and that's to outscore teams. So hopefully they can get some guys back. Looks like Anzalone may be back this week, which would be huge in the middle of the linebacking core. And hopefully they can get some other guys back. Of course, some of those guys are done for the season. But I want to see the Lions at as close to full strength as they can be because they are a fun team. I enjoy watching them. I just have my concerns about them as we move forward into the final week of the regular season and into the postseason.
Yeah, well, everyone has their concerns about every team, but whenever you got an offense that can score at the clip that the Lions do, I feel like any team is going to be hard to say that the Lions can't beat them in that game. And that's why, you got to hold out faith, especially if we can get the win this week. That's 3 games away in a dome where our offense can just, go nuclear. I feel like that we can do that on every game with the way that we're set up right now.
That makes a good point, and I think it's going to be obviously the matchup of Week 18 is the Lions and Vikings. Do we want to go ahead and talk about that one or some of the other Week 18 games first?
I say let's get straight to the Lions. This is what it's all about this week, all right? This is the biggest matchup, like I said, in Lions franchise history, and we're going to be able to get the 1 seed. Like I said, I mean the Vikings have lost to the Lions the last 4 times, and we've put up 30 points. Everyone's saying that the Vikings are some, great defense, and sure they've been playing better now, but they still just don't have the players, I feel like, to be able to stop the Lions on offense, especially because we're going to be going for it on fourth down. If we get in that fourth and short scenario, we're going to be able to get that first down and stay on the field. Obviously there's some concerns with that, but I feel like that's what it's going to come down to. And we're going to be able to put up at least 30 points, probably more than that, and be able to get this dub.
We'll see. So you say the Lions, they scored 30 against the Vikings last first game, and that first game was very interesting because the Vikings had an early lead. Then the Lions looked like they were in control. Vikings come back. They take the lead, right? The Lions, the game-winning kick, they trailing going into that game-winning kick. They only won by one or two, right? It wasn't
Yeah, we
tied.
won by 2.
Right. So they were trailing going into that kick. They had to make it or they lost. It wasn't like you miss and you go to overtime. That game was a razor thin margins. Both teams had like the same amount of yards. Both teams had the same amount of third down conversion, same amount of time of possession. It was like a, a much of a coin flip game as you can get. And that's with the Lions being a little bit healthier than they are now, obviously. And that's just a worrisome factor. Now, I do agree that the Lions, they, I feel like I have more confidence in their offense, yes, with Goff. And even without Montgomery, Gibbs is a beast. And Amon-Ra, JMO down the field, Laporta over the middle. I like their offense more, but the defense is the weakest out of the four units either way. I just don't know if I can confidently go with Detroit here on week 18.
All right, well, give me one more try to convince you here, Brent. Like you said, our offense against their defense, like we're going to be able to take them down, right? We if we turn this into a shootout, Goff is going to be able to outperform Darnold if he's having to throw the ball as much as he's going to have to because we're going to be able to score the ball. And I feel like our defense, especially our secondary, will be able to make enough plays to where we can get a couple incompletions and force a third and long and get that ball back. And maybe, we can tackle Aaron Jones for a loss or a short game. And at the end of the day, we're going to be able to convert those fourth downs and keep our offense on the field more than the Vikings are going to be able to do that in this matchup. Not to mention the home crowd, too, in Detroit's going to be absolutely insane. I can't wait to see the scene there. And we have the advantage in our run game against theirs, and we have the advantage in our passing game against theirs. As Jared Goff, like you said, throwing to all these receivers, I just feel like we're gonna be able to put up more points than them whenever it comes down to just airing this ball out and keeping our offense on the field. Like I said, like we're just gonna be going for it, and I feel like
What
we're
do
gonna
you
be able to get it. Ben Johnson's gonna have all the plays ready to go this
what
week.
do you think? What's the score prediction? What about a ballpark or something?
Yeah, I'm thinking 35 Lions to 24 Vikings.
Really?
Maybe they'll sneak in a late one and get to like
Double digit
31.
win?
Yeah, they could sneak in a late touchdown, but I think we're going to have them handled coming
Even
down
with
the end of
that,
the
even
fourth
if you
quarter.
say 35-24, that's over the over. And I think that's my favorite play in this game. The Lions Vikings over is just 56 and a half. And every single Lions game in the last month has gone over that because they're just desperate for points every time. The 49ers game, what the teams combined for 74. I mean, that would have hit the over about halftime almost. Obviously, both teams really lit up the scoreboard in the second half. But I think the 56 and a half is my favorite play in that Lions Vikings game for sure. I like the over a lot. I hope the Lions win. I mean, if you're making me pick with my life on the line, I'll take the Lions in the game. Definitely not as confident as I am with the over in the game. But I hope the Lions can find a way to pull it out. I'll be rooting for them. Even if my Falcons bet is dead by that time, I'll still be riding with the Lions.
Absolutely, you got to. And like I said, everyone's talking about these injuries and they're forgetting the part where this offense has been going absolutely insane.
Oh, it's
Do
not
not
about the
forget that.
offense. It's not about the offense at all.
Well, yeah, but the offense is going to be able to put up more points than the other team in these games that the Lions are in. If you watch what they're doing, it's actually insane. I can't believe every time we get the ball, we're getting it in the end zone. So I just feel like it's going to be enough this
Okay, so
week,
now
especially against the division rival.
here's another big hypothetical for you. Obviously, there's so much on the line in terms of the stakes of this game. You win, you get the one seed. Bye. Home field advantage throughout. You lose, you drop down to the five. You're playing I think the Rams are actually the most likely because they're resting everybody against the
Hmm.
Seahawks. They're underdogs against the Seahawks. because even though they could win and lock up the three, McVay's not starting Stafford, anybody like that. Tampa's obviously going to go all out. They're huge favorites against Carolina. If Tampa wins and Rams lose, then the Rams are the four. But most likely, Rams or Tampa. Could it also be Atlanta? That's the five. You're on the road playing one of those teams, most likely Rams or Tampa, maybe long shot Atlanta. And then your path from there is hard no matter what. If you win that game, you're playing either Minnesota on the road or Philadelphia on the road, most likely.
Yeah.
And so where does the confidence level of, okay, like let's say you think if the Lions get the one seed, you think they're 50-50 chance to make the Super Bowl. If they get the five, how much difference is that? How much of a difference is that in your head for how massive this game is?
I'd bring it down to like 25%. I'd say it will cut our chances in half. It's obviously not going to eliminate us because we are undefeated on the road this year, and this team can play in any environment, especially with how the defensive line or the offensive line is built. I mean, in the two act like weather games you could call it that we've had, we beat up the Packers and we beat up the Bears. And so if we're going to Philadelphia, we're going to be ready for a game like that in some tough conditions. So I'm not worried if we have to go to Philadelphia. And if we get another shot at the Vikings in that second round, I have a good feeling we're going to be able to take them down. They're not going to beat us twice in a few weeks. So I am, oh, it's going to hurt us. Obviously, we want to win this game, but the season's definitely not over, especially because everyone's going to write us off and say that we're going to lose to the Rams. If somehow we do end up losing to the Vikings, everyone's going to say, yeah, Lions season is done. They almost lost to the Rams week one. This is back when our offense was not clicking at all the first few weeks of the season. We're going to be able to beat a Rams team whenever we're going to their place. Their defense is just too young, but we'll get into that matchup if it happens. But I'm really not super worried. I still think that it will be a tougher road, but we'll still have a better chance. Honestly, I'd put it like 50 if we lose, 30 if we or 50 if we win, 30 if we lose this week to make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think it's massive. Like, I think right now, whoever gets the one seed, the Lions or the Vikings, is probably the most likely team out of the NFC to make the Super Bowl. And then I think if you lose, you might drop all the way down below the Eagles, below the Bucks, below the Rams. You might like it might end up being seed level lines. I think it's that massive because I think the NFC is razor thin in terms of the competition and having to play three games, most likely all of them on the road, just makes it that much more tough. So this game is huge for both teams. I think the winner puts themselves in a really good spot, and the losers, like you said, probably a lot of people are going to think that they're going to be one and done in the playoffs now. I don't know if I'd agree with that. It depends on the matchup. But I don't think the Rams or the Bucks are anything to be taken lightly. That's for sure. They're both teams that have quarterbacks that have won in the playoffs. Obviously, with Stafford, he's the most decorated quarterback in the NFC playoffs with good coaches, good weapons, playing good football, both those teams. It's going to be a big drop off in my eyes. So, yeah, we'll see how it shakes out. But Lions, I think it's a massive game.
And one thing you got to remember too is the two playoff wins we had last year were against the Rams and the Bucks. Granted, both of those were at home, so we'd
And
have to go to one of
they
those two
both came
teams.
down to the wire. There was chances for both those teams to win. So it's not like, they did get the wins and they would deserve it. They were the better team in both those games, I think, and they moved on. But it wouldn't have taken much for it to been the other way and the Lions to go home.
That's true, but I just think that where this Lions offense is now is just on a different level. Even though we have a lot of the same players, they're just so committed together to scoring. It's actually insane. We put up the most points, Brent. What's the team besides the Lions this year? What's the last team to average over 33 points per game in a season? Do
Probably
you
the
know that?
2018 Chiefs.
2018 Chiefs. That's it. It's the Detroit Lions, bro. We are on that level right now. And so it's hard to say a team like that's going to go one and done in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair comparison in terms of teams because that Chiefs team, they did get the one seed and they had an atrocious defense that year. That's why Mahomes had to go for 50 touchdowns and 5,000 yards because exactly what the Lions are doing. They had to outscore everybody. They couldn't rely on their defense to come up with stops. They had to rely on getting 7 points every time they touched the football. And that's where the Lions are at. And I think the Lions could do that. The Chiefs that season lost in the AFC Championship game in overtime. And they were that close to making the Super Bowl, and they may be that close to winning a Super Bowl. So I think the Lions have all that in front of them. They could do any of that. But that Chiefs team also had the bye. That's why they were able to get there. And without it, just makes the road that much more treacherous. I think that the Lions are a very capable team. I'm not discrediting their chances at all right now, but I think it's going to be a lot tougher if they end up having to stack wins from the road. So we will see, but it's going to be a fun game. And I'll be, like I said, I'll be rooting on the Lions. I'll be really rooting on points, though, because I think that's where my money's going to be.
There you go. Well, I'm excited to see it. It is going to be a great game. And talking about all those scenarios got me a little excited for where you got all these teams in your 12 pack coming up in a little bit, Brent. But before we get to that, what other games, what other scenarios we got to talk about for the playoff picture this week?
Yeah, well, let's start with the Saturday games because that's the AFC North shaking things out. Baltimore has to win against Cleveland to lock up the North. And it's weird that the way these games are staggered, that Baltimore plays before Pittsburgh. Baltimore's the biggest favorite, I think, maybe of the season. They're 18-point favorites. That's just insane number for an NFL game, you know? That's insane for a college football playoff game, although about all those games are getting 20-point wins. But I mean, for an NFL game, that's a huge number. I mean, there's no reason why Baltimore won't win and probably win convincingly, which sets up an interesting scenario in the next game in terms of seeding and in terms of mentality. Because it's kind of like what you said with the Lions. You know, you prep all week trying to, okay, maybe there's an opportunity that if we win this game, we win the division. That's the exact same thing with Pittsburgh right now. There's an opportunity if Baltimore loses, if we win the division for Pittsburgh. So they have to be prepping with that mentality in mind. But even if they don't, if they win against Cincinnati regardless, the worst they do is the five, which means they get Houston. They lose that game, the Chargers win, they could drop to the six. That means they get Baltimore. The difference between Houston and Baltimore, I think everyone knows the difference. So I'm very intrigued the Pittsburgh Cincinnati game and how that one is going to play out because obviously the stakes may be lower for Pittsburgh. I mean, 99% chance Baltimore's beating Cleveland. So they're not going to be playing for a division title, but they're still playing for that five seed and they're still playing mentally, you know, they're prepping for it. Like they have to go out and win to potentially win the division. Meanwhile, for Cincinnati, they're playing for their lives. They have to win and then get a lot of help the next day. So, what are your thoughts on that Pittsburgh Cincinnati game that, you know, the scenarios play out even before that game kicks off?
Exactly. And I think, just like you brought it up, I think loser of this game, their chances of winning a playoff game is out the door because the Chargers are going to be able to beat the Raiders the next day and jump ahead of the Steelers. And the Steelers could go to Houston and get a dub. I
Yeah.
believe that. So if they're able to beat the Bengals here, knock them out, and then be able to play the Texans in that first round would be so huge for them. They have to win this game, but I think the Bengals are going to be able to get it done. I feel like Joe Burrow has been playing so well, and he's going to be able to carry them to a win against the Steelers defense that we saw their collapse in that 10-day stretch where they lost to the Eagles, to the Ravens, and to the Chiefs. Comparable offense to those other teams, at least with what they're doing. I don't know the status on Chase Brown, but that would be important to have him for this game, obviously, have a little balance there with their rush attack. But either way, I feel like the Bengals are just going to be able to put up a lot of points in this game with the way that the Steelers defense has been kind of trending downwards. But, maybe they get a little bit bigger rest after Christmas and they're ready to show out. I would lean more Bengals in this game, but I think it'll just be a classic AFC North showdown. I'm glad they put it on their prime time for us on Saturday night.
And that's one of my favorite bets of the week is you give Tomlin at home rest advantage and an underdog. That's just perfect. Chef's kiss for the Steelers. Steelers, one of my favorite picks of the week. I just talked to you about Bengals. They haven't beaten anybody good. Their best win of the season was their most recent game on the road in Denver. That took overtime. Pittsburgh, better record than Denver on the road division game. Pittsburgh's gotten more days of rest. I like Pittsburgh as an underdog in this spot for sure. Cincinnati, they're going to be playing. They have to. Obviously, they have to play for like their season's on the line. And meanwhile, Pittsburgh gets not to that extent. So that's my only concern is maybe Baltimore is dominating at halftime, and then the mentality, the mindset of Pittsburgh's players, maybe the concentration level just drops a little bit. That's the only concern though, because Pittsburgh, they have to focus and try to place and get some momentum at the very least, even if they're not worried about seeding. The players, for us, it's a lot more fun to talk about the matchups and stuff. The players, I'm sure they're just going out there. They want to get a win. You got to get some momentum, build some confidence going into the postseason when you've lost 3 games in a row, like you said, against 3 really good teams in the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs. There's no shame in losing to any of those teams on their own. But when you do it all back to back like that, you obviously kind of get exposed as a team that's not to that caliber. But the Bengals are not on the level with the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Eagles, not by any means. So I like Pittsburgh in that Saturday game. What else on Sunday is going to have some big implications?
I was just thinking one more point is Russ has to have a great game against the Bengals here. He was on a 1 year deal, so he needs to get a contract and have a spot to play next year, whether it's with the Steelers or somewhere else. And if he lays a dud in this game, and then I doubt he'll do very well against the Ravens in that playoff game, he could not have a starting job
That's
next year.
interesting. I feel like he's done enough that he'll get a starting job somewhere. Like he's got a starting job over Rodgers, that's for sure. If you're a team that's a quarterback needy and you don't get a guy in the draft, you're going to Russ over Rodgers, right? But I think that there is a chance maybe the Steelers try to look somewhere else, although they're kind of in no man's land. Who are they going to be able to get? I feel like they'll have to run it back with Russ. But it does make for an interesting point in terms of Russ on his own.
Yep. Well, I think one more game we got to get into right away is the Dolphins versus the Jets. Because if the Chiefs are able to beat the Broncos, the Dolphins can sneak in there. And like you said, Rodgers hasn't been playing very good. They just got absolutely whitewashed by the Bills. And so, what are your thoughts on this one? Do you think I don't even know if Tua is playing or not? I feel like he's trending to not play, but Huntley played good in the game the other day against the Browns. So, what are your thoughts on this one? I think the Dolphins are probably going to be able to get it done.
Huntley was serviceable. I don't think he was definitely good. But yeah, I mean, if you remember the Jets Dolphins game when they played a couple weeks back, the Jets were had it there for the taking and they blew it late. Looked like they were going to win that game and have one of their marquee wins of the season. I just think that the vibes in New York land right now are just off the rails if they haven't been already. That last game against Buffalo determined it even more. Rodgers is going to try to get his 500th career touchdown pass. He's stuck on 499. So he's going to be focused on that. But the whole team is just in shambles. I think Miami wins this game. It wouldn't shock me if the Jets somehow pulled it off. That would be kind of a classic Rodgers thing to do. And then next thing you know, he's building momentum for a comeback next year. So who knows? But Miami has to have this game. And usually when Miami has to have games, that means they lose them. When we're talking historically in most recent years. And must wins for Miami mean they lose, whether it's to try to win a division last year, whether it was in the playoffs last year, going back years prior. So it kind of does feel like it maybe sets up for a Jets win. I just don't buy this Jets team at all. So I'll lean Miami, but it's definitely one I'm staying away from.
It is so hard to pick this game too because I don't know exactly what the weather's going to be like, but it's in New York, and we know how the Dolphins play whenever they have to go up north late in the year to those cold games. So it's going to be tough. Even if the Dolphins do pull it out, who's like we can go ahead and talk about the Chiefs game, but I still think that it could be one of those times where Rodgers is like, "Let me get one more win under my belt. We're going all out." Adams has a vintage game. I could definitely see something like that happening.
Exactly. Yeah, let's talk some Chiefs ball. They are being disrespected. 11-point dogs against the Denver Broncos. Carson Wentz. Didn't he lead his team to a 1 seed last year or 1 seed in years past? Last year, he won a Week 18 game as a starting quarterback with the Rams. This man, he's fired up. Even the Chiefs last year, when they were resting everybody because they'd already had their division locked up in the final week of the season, they were able to beat the Chargers with a backup quarterback last year. Now, obviously, the Broncos are playing for a lot more. The Broncos are reeling. They've lost a bunch of games in a row as well, and they have to win this one to clinch that playoff spot. So, do I think the Chiefs will win? I wouldn't take them 50-50, but I like them to cover. I think it'll be they'll play aggressive. They're going to be going hard. Andy Reid's still going to coach to win. And I like the Chiefs to make this a game. They're not going to let the Broncos just walk and waltz into the playoffs.
I mean, I agree with that. I don't understand this at all. I mean, are they sending out the Kansas Jayhawks team? I mean, how can you go from the Chiefs? How can you be 10.5 point favorites or 10.5 point underdogs? I mean, who are they even going to have out there? Is it going to be just a bunch of special teamers? There's no way they're actually benching every player on their roster, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, to be fair, last year in the Week 18 game, they were using a nose tackle at middle linebacker. They did do some crazy things where they just let people play in different positions. So yeah, I mean, I think the Chiefs are going to have fun with it, and obviously everybody that's important is going to be on the inactive list. Obviously Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco, Chris Jones, all those guys. I'm sure McDuffie's not going to play. Anybody that's like the Chiefs can't afford to lose, they're not going to play. But you're right. I mean, let's think, if the Chiefs play their team, they're what, 6 point favorites in this game probably. Now
Yeah.
it's a 16-point swing. I mean, that's a lot of points swing when you have 53 guys on the roster. You can't bench them all, like you said. There's probably going to be 10, maybe 15 guys that the Chiefs are resting. And the other guys are going to go out there and play as hard as they possibly can. I think it'll be a dogfight. I think Denver maybe wins by a touchdown, but I don't think the Chiefs are just going to let their division rival waltz into the playoffs. That's for sure.
Exactly. And, Andy Reid is still going to be coaching, and Carson Wentz is going to try to get himself a starting job
Yeah.
next year. He's one of the best backups in the league. So he's going to put it all out on the line. Maybe that ends up in 3 picks. He could pull a Jameis Winston over here,
A Man of
but he could
Steel.
also pull
It's
a
going to be the
Jameis Winston
Carson
and go
show.
crazy.
It's going to be the Carson show. Carson Wentz, Carson Man of Steel. Those guys are going to be balling out in the backfield.
Yeah, no, that'll be an exciting one. Yeah, I think that's about all the games that
I mean,
that matter for this.
the only other ones with implications really are the the South, NFC South. The Bucks are massive favorites against the Saints that have nobody, right? There's no way the Bucks lose that one, right? Falcons, they had their chance last week. That's about done.
Yeah, I think that one's done. If we're somehow talking about the Falcons in the playoffs next week, I mean, something crazy happened, but I just don't see it happening at all. Bucks are too good. I'd probably take them to win by more than 16. The Saints are just completely depleted, and we'll probably put up single digit points in this one.
And then another one I think that is interesting, even though it has no implications on seeding, it does for the number one overall pick. Bills at Patriots. Now, Bills are resting everybody. Josh Allen's going to take one snap to keep his consecutive game streak going or whatever. And the Patriots right now have the number one pick. I think both teams, I mean, I think everybody on both teams is hoping they lose that game, right? The Bills want to lose so the Patriots don't get the number one pick. I mean, the Bills don't want their division rival to get the number one pick, right? I
Yeah,
mean, the Bills are hoping they lose that game for sure. And the Patriots are hoping that they lose that game to get the number one pick as well. That's it. It's interesting but then you also got the aspect of, well, Gerard Mayo, even in his first year, he's kind of already on the hot seat. Maybe he has to feel like he has to coach to win the game, keep his job. Maybe they're telling him in his ear, if you win, you're gonna get fired. Don't win the game, or like I don't know. That game is just intriguing to me because I feel like both teams have so much incentive to not win.
yeah, that is an interesting one. Yeah, I've never thought about it like that. Where I mean, the thing is, the players still
Right.
want to play good to
Oh,
put
of
it on
course.
tape, but like, yeah,
Of course, but the coaching staffs, I mean, McDermott is going to play his worst players imaginable.
yeah.
Probably going to have probably going to have his cornerback out there playing defensive tackle. I don't know. Like, why would they have any reason to let the Patriots just get the number one pick? They're going to be trying to lose. I feel like the coaching staff, obviously the players out there. Yes, that's the why tanking never works in the NFL is because you got 22 guys. Every single guy on the field is playing for a job. Especially if they're resting starters, those guys have all the more incentive to play as hard as they can because if they don't put out good tape, they're not going to be in the NFL next year. So they have to be playing as hard as they can. But the coaching staff, the front office, the management, the ownership, their mindset is different. So it's just that's an interesting game. I don't really know who I think's going to end up winning. I think the Patriots probably end up winning because I think they're more inept than the Bills. So if the Bills want to lose, I think they'll be successful in losing.
Yeah, and Drake May is going to go for 400
Well,
yards, and
I
everyone's
think
going to
he
say
shouldn't
how
even
awesome he.
play. I think Drake May shouldn't play. There's no reason for him to play. It's the last week of the season. Just rest up for next year at this point. I don't know. But Mayo will probably have him play because I don't know.
Yeah, and a bunch of crazy stuff could happen week 18, but that is an interesting one that you don't see too often.
Yeah.
Well, BS, you want to get into that 12 pack? I'm getting kind of thirsty. I want to see what you got cooked up for us this week.
All right. I'm trying to wet your whistle. Hopefully now you're ready.
Oh, we're ready.
We've got a 12 pack coming. I'm going to rank my top 12 teams in the NFL, getting close to the playoffs. So it's kind of playoff edition. These are going to be teams that I think could make a run for the whole entire thing. So let me go ahead and get my 12 pack out and ready. I'll go through yours from last week, Luke. Yours, remind the audience you had the Lions at number one. The Chiefs at two, Ravens three, Bills four, Packers five, Vikings six, Eagles seven, Commanders eight, Rams nine, Chargers 10, Bengals 11, and Falcons 12. And now for my 12 pack myself. All right, here we go. At number 12, the 12th best team in the NFL, one that we've talked about recently. They've lost their last three games, but I think they get a big win this week and maybe build some momentum heading into the playoffs. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They come in at number 12. They've gotten beaten around. They're definitely not. We had them, I think we had them in the top six at some point this year. They're clearly not a top six team, probably not a top 10 team, but I think at number 12 feels right for Tomlin and the Steelers as they have a big one against the Bengals on Saturday. At number 11, this team drops a considerable amount because Jordan Love just does not have the goods. Might be the worst quarterback in the division. I've got the Packers at number 11. Just haven't beaten. I just don't know who they can beat. That I think about the NFC playoffs. And I think they might be the worst team in the playoff field out of the seven that look like they're going to get in. So Packers come in at number 11. Number 10, right above them, the Commanders, Washington at number 10. Jaden Daniels, I'd take him over Jordan Love every day of the week. He doesn't have that much less experience at this point. Love's only have one more season on him. Love's basically played two seasons. Jaden Daniels played one full season now. And Daniels looks like the better player, so I like Washington more than Green Bay. Give me them at number 10. At number 9, the playoff experience. If the coach and the quarterback here with the LA Rams, put them at number 9 on my 12 pack. I think their defense is probably the worst out of any defense on this list. Even worse than the Lions coming up, which is saying a lot. They've got Jared Verse. He's a great pass rusher. They got a young defense, but it just is not reliable enough. Now, the Rams, their defense did hold up against the Cardinals in their most recent game. It was actually the offense that just wasn't able to get much going. They barely survived a Cardinals team that had nothing to play for. So the Rams are a team that a lot of other people are a lot more high on than me. I think they're good, but they're just barely in my top 10 at number 9. At number 8 is the Bake Show and the Buccaneers. I'm still on these guys. They had that bad loss to the Cowboys a couple weeks back, but they rebounded with a big win against Carolina and looks like they're going to cement themselves as the NFC South champions. And I think they're going to get all the way up to the 3 seed. And I think that's massive because the loser of the Vikings and Lions is the 4, obviously. And I haven't said either of those two teams yet. And I've said the two teams that could be the 6 or the 7, the Packers or the Commanders. So getting that 3 seed and either playing the Packers or the Commanders at home compared to the Lions or the Vikings is pretty big. And McVay doesn't seem to care about it. He's not playing the starters. But the Bucks obviously have to win to get the division. And in that case, could jump up to the 3. So yeah, I like the Bucks right there in that spot. And now for number 7, the LA Chargers. Chargers are the most dangerous wild card team in the AFC, in my opinion, with Harbaugh and Herbert still looking for his first playoff win. They've now finally got a head coach. So the Chargers are a team that, if they get in, they could be dangerous Well, I mean, they're going to be in, depending on who they play, depending on the matchup in the first round, they could be dangerous. So I like the Chargers at 7, and that is the bottom half of my 12 pack, Luke. I know it's pretty perfect so far, isn't it?
Not exactly. I still think you have Washington too low here. Having the Buccaneers ahead of them at this point, I feel like is a little bit too far. I would probably just switch those two, and I think you've got a good list so far. Also, Green Bay, I don't think you can drop them that much for losing to the Vikings by two. I feel like they should be a little bit higher. But you are kind of right. Those little bottom, obviously you got the Vikings, Eagles, and Lions at the top of the NFC. And any of them, you could see making some good noise in the playoff, making it to the NFC Championship game for really any of those. And so it is interesting seeing how a lot of those are pretty interchangeable.
Yep, and so that leaves the top three teams in the AFC and the top three teams in the NFC left at the top six. You want me to go ahead and tell you how I see the top six, Luke?
You better not say Lions right now.
I will not say Lions right now. At number six, I think is the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Eagles is not a team we've really talked about yet this week on the pod, but there's some intrigue with them. Obviously, Saquon Barkley hit the 2,000 yard mark. He's had a hell of a season. That offensive line is a beast. But it seems like he kind of wanted to go for the record. Now he's not going to go for the record against the Giants in a meaningless game with the Eagles getting the 2 seed. Probably the right decision, in my opinion, not to go for it, just to rest because Barkley, he does have injury history. And then it's like, well, do you bring out the offensive line or is he running behind the backup offensive line in week 18? Whatever the case may be, Barkley's already gotten more carries this season than he has in any season this year. And they're going to need to rely on him in the playoffs. They're the most run heavy team in the league. So makes sense for him to sit, but I think maybe that causes some frustration in the locker room. And Hurts is still in concussion protocol. They've got to make sure that he's healthy and back. They're a team that I could see them making the Super Bowl, no doubt about it, but they won't be my pick. They're at number six, and great defense. I didn't mention the defense because their defense is amazing. And I'm kind of a lion. I'm kind of an Eagles doubter, so can't talk, but can't say anything bad about the defense. The defense is legit. Number five, another team that has a legit defense, and it is the Minnesota Vikings. We've talked about them a lot this week on the pod, and there's not much more to say. They're at number five. They're a really good team, great defense, but their quarterback, just questions about them. And I don't think the Vikings are going to win. So that's why I've got them behind the team at number four, and that is the Detroit Lions. Lions come in at number four. I think they're still kings of the North when it's all said and done. Maybe kings of the whole NFC, but that only gets them to the top four because the three best teams in football right now are all on the other side of the bracket in the AFC. And coming in at number three is a team that beat Detroit on the road. That is the Buffalo Bills. Bills, good win last week against the Jets. They struggled against the Patriots the week before. Their defense is also one that is very suspect in my eyes. And Josh Allen, he's there's only still you see those glimpses of when he's going to do something stupid. So Buffalo, they're a dangerous team, no doubt about it. But now they're going to have a tough path in the playoffs. They're either going to play the Broncos, maybe even the Bengals in that first game, and then probably a matchup against the team that I've got at number two, which is the team that's playing some really good football right now, and that is the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar is having an incredible season. I think he deserves to be the MVP. He's been the most valuable player in my eyes this season. His stats are incredible. He just makes so many great plays. Turnover to interception ratio is insane. His yardage that he does throwing the ball and running the ball. And the defense is much improved over the last back half of the season. I've said it midway through the year. I was like, this defense is kind of coming around. They've certainly turned that corner. They shut out Houston last week. They only gave up 2 points on a safety. So yeah, the Ravens D, they're legit. I've got Baltimore at number two, which means I've got Kansas City number one. The Chiefs, of course, are the best team in the NFL. There's no question about it. Now their quarterback didn't even make the Pro Bowl, so I guess maybe I don't know why they're that good. They don't have a Pro Bowl quarterback. Their head coach, he's not going to win Coach of the Year. He's 40 to 1 to win Coach of the Year. So their coach isn't that good. They have nobody on the defense. They only have one Pro Bowler on the defense, Chris Jones. So a defense with one Pro Bowler, that's surely not that good of a defense. And, none of their wide receivers or running back, they didn't make the Pro Bowl either. They don't have a rookie of the year wide receiver or anything like that. So I don't know why they're that good. They just keep winning they just keep winning games. So yeah, the Chiefs 15-1. They've won over the last 365 days, Luke. You know how many times the Chiefs have lost in the last 365 days?
One.
You know how many Super Bowls they've won in the last 365 days?
It was one.
Yeah, so I've experienced as many losses in the last year as Super Bowl championships. So yeah, I mean that's all you really have to say about that team. They're number one, clearly, far and away the best team in football. That's my 12 pack.
All right. Well, I kind of could see that one coming. I think you did a good job ranking the AFC teams and the top NFC teams. I think those are right. I think you could sneak the Lions in there up a little bit higher and maybe the Vikes up a little bit higher too. I feel like if the Vikings played the Bills, the Vikings would beat them. So I'd probably slip the Bills down a little bit more, but you know, we're never going to see that matchup. So we don't really have to worry about it too much. Those were some good rankings though. And I do think Lions versus Chiefs is probably the most likely Super Bowl up to this point, as this is our last pod of the regular season. And I'm excited for playoffs next week. Can't wait to see you there. What else you got, B?
No, nothing else. I'm excited to see how this last week shakes out. Obviously, that Lions Vikings game. Yeah, I'm gonna have my popcorn ready for that one Sunday night. And I think the Steelers get the win against the Bengals. That's the other game I'm going to be really tuned into. Of course, the game I'll be tuned most into is the Carson Show, Wentz and Steele, and see if the Chiefs can spoil the party for the Broncos. And, Tyreek Hill's tweeting. He said, Happy New Year's, especially to the Chiefs. He loves the Chiefs so much. I think he wants to rejoin the team. And even if he can, he's just hoping that it gives the Dolphins a chance to make the playoffs. So, yes, fire up Kansas City. Let's see what the Lions got if they can take the one seed on the other side of the bracket. And yep, we'll be back for a fun playoff episode next week.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And that was another episode of the Hesse Bros podcast. See you next week.